Christians, and my sister Murdoch here, you say that you think God allows but does not order things that go against his will. And then you say that it doesn't make sense that it would please him for these things to happen. So let's start with the first part. You think that God allows but does not order things. So what you're saying is that there are things that God allows that he did not order. How does that make sense? How can anything happen that goes outside the boundaries of God's decree? If you say that he didn't order it, but that he allowed it, and that what he did not order actually happened, then what is the source of it if it didn't come from God? What is the source of the event that happens if it didn't come from God's decree? And how can there be anything that happens that goes outside of God's decree? How can anything that takes place on earth, anything, happen without coming from God's direct order and decree? Now, you say that you think God allows things to happen, but he doesn't order things that go against his own will. It depends on how you look at God's will, because there's two ways of looking at God's will. One way is God's will of precept, and the other is the will of God's decree, or his decretive will. So you have two aspects of God's will: his preceptive will and his decretive will. His decretive will is his will of decree, what he's ordered. And then he has his will of precept, which is the mandate that he's laid upon man to obey. For instance, God gave his law, his 10 words, 10 commandments. These are his will of precept for men, even though men don't obey it. But it is nonetheless his will of precept. And God expects men to obey his law, and men don't obey his law, and their obedience or the lack thereof is both come from his will of decree, or his decretive will. And you have to distinguish between the two, because there is his will of precept and there is his will of decree, his preceptive will and his decretive will. The decretive will is what God has ordered for all of creation through all time, forever. There is nothing that takes place in time, in creation, that God did not order by his divine sovereign decree. However, his will of precept, he has given to men to obey or to not obey. But whatever they do, it is determined by God what it is they will actually do, whether they comply or whether they do not comply. You say it doesn't make any sense that it would please God for bad things to happen. Well, the thing about it is, I understand why you would say that, because you and I are not God. His ways are far higher than ours. And I know that you may consider that a cop-out, but it's actually the word of God himself that says that his ways are above ours. God knows what he's doing in his creation. Creation assumes that God must respond to creation a certain way, that he is not under no obligation he's under no obligation to abide by. When God destroyed Pharaoh's army, it pleased him to do so. When God does things and wipes out nations of people and told his people to wipe out nations of people, he ordered things that he was pleased to have done. That's just simply a fact. When he made Nebuchadnezzar grovel like an animal, it pleased him to do so. When he took down Belshazzar, he was pleased to do so. When he sent Joseph into slavery, he was pleased to do so. The Bible tells us in Genesis 50, shall not the Lord of the earth judge rightly. God is a just judge no matter what capacity. There is nothing that happens on this earth that does not please God from his will, from his decorative position as a sovereign. He does what he does, and everything he does pleases him, because everything that he does comes under the auspices of justice or comes under the auspices of grace. And God is pleased with his justice, and he's also pleased with his grace and mercy and compassion. Be provoked, be persuaded.